Good morning. My name is Meg Detloff, and I work for USGS PNAMP. Thanks for joining us for the January 2025 PNAMP Fish Monitoring Work Group meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting logistics. Unless you're speaking, please turn off your camera and microphone by clicking the icons on your team platform. If you have questions or feedback, please use the chat function or raise your hand and unmute yourself. You guys have heard me say this. We can mute you, but we cannot unmute you. We're recording the meeting today, and this one will be available upon request. So this one won't go on YouTube. You'll just have to reach out to me for this one. If you're having trouble with the chat function, here's a couple of troubleshooting tips. Try leaving and joining again. Using Edge for Teams usually works better than Chrome. So using the desktop version or using the browser version or vice versa. So if desktop or browser is not working, just try the other one. And PNAMP commits to fostering an open and welcoming environment free from harassment and discrimination. So please remain respectful. I would like to acknowledge the Fish Monitoring Work Group leadership. The names are associated with the tasks they have previously or currently are leading. Our leadership is partially based on in-kind time, meaning these folks saw a need and were willing to use their time to help solve a problem or issue in our community, and we are grateful for their help. The core team consists of Casey Bleesner, Marie Kadobos, Lara Erickson, Nancy Leonard, Russell Scranton, Mari Williams, and Jen Bayer. And to help me keep track of participation, if you guys could open the chat and introduce yourself with name and organization, that kind of helps you acquaint yourself with the chat function as well. And then while you guys are doing that, I'll quickly cover today's agenda. We'll kick off the meeting with updates on current tasks. Next, Russ Perry, a research fish biologist in the quantitative ecology section at the USGS Western Fisheries Research Center, will present putting time back into space for time Mark-Recapture models. And then we'll do some Q&A, and then I'll close the meeting with some quick wrap up and next steps. And with that, I'll start doing the task team updates. These are overviews of progress. If you're interested in learning more about a particular task, please visit the project page on the PNAMP website and select specific task. Jen or Sam will drop the link to the project page in the chat. And then the leads or I will give a brief task update, and then we'll pause for questions or comments. And then if you have a question after we've moved past a task, feel free to type it in the chat, and Jen or Sam will help me circle back after all the updates are complete. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Morgan Bond with NOAA for the carrying capacity update.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So just a quick recap here. The carrying capacity standards team is really putting together a document to try to give a better description and some advice about what opportunities or what options people have to estimate capacity for salmonids in streams. And so these really range across essentially the range of methods that we could find that are really being employed in streams for salmon currently. And these range from stuff that you're really familiar with, like stock recruit, sort of fish in, fish out type models, to habitat estimation and how we estimate capacity from habitat information that we have, all the way to something like food web models that are really taking a bioenergetics approach. And so we have a working document now. We've got a draft of this that is looking pretty good. We've been slowed down a little bit because you see there's 5 of us on the team putting this together, but there are a lot of co-authors. So we have a bunch of external authors that are really helping to contribute and move this forward, but it does make the process a bit slower when we have this enormous group of co-authors. So if you have in the past reached out to us and offered to be a reviewer for this, we haven't forgotten about you. We just are not quite ready to send this out for review. And if you haven't reached out and you want to, let me know, reach out to me, and happy to put you on that list of folks that have offered to review once we have a draft that we'd like to send out a little more broadly. And I think that's about it for our update. Questions?
You guys can type them in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourself. It's totally fine. And like I said, we'll circle back in case we don't give you enough time to type in your questions. All right, moving along. All right, I will give a quick update on the PIT tag array data and related data analysis task. This task is This task is focused on documenting and recommending improvements to the data management and analytical methods and tools for PIT tag array data. In 2024, task leads identified some key needs from the PIT tag community. Standouts were a one-stop shop to help point people to resources for PIT tag data and analysis, a series of PIT tag specific webinars targeting analysis tools, data cleaning and prep, and how-tos for downloading from data repositories. There's also been a request for a hands-on workshop that would target more in-depth trainings on analysis methods. We are currently planning the webinar series, and depending on the success of the series and feedback from participants, we will discuss an in-person workshop in the future. Those of you that have been tracking have heard me talk about this, and I'm actually meeting with the potential presenters this afternoon. So we should have more information shortly, but basically there are two components to the series. Tools to improve effectiveness for managing PIT tag data and analyzing detection data from PIT tag array data. So first, we want to provide good tools at all skill levels to streamline data management and formatting for specific needs. We also want to introduce the data tool repositories where these tools can be found. After the series, like I said, we'll determine the interest and whether or not it makes sense to transition our objectives towards data analysis, which would likely be a hands-on workshop. It's just a little bit too intense to do in a webinar. The slide you guys are seeing right now is the potential structure of the webinar series. We are currently in discussions with the presenters and reaching out to other experts just as they kind of pop up. If you have a request, please feel free to contact me, and I'll send out more information after this afternoon, and we have a little bit more solid information. Questions on this or anything I missed from Russ or Marika's not available today.
Yeah, one quick comment or just a clarification on level 1 training. One of the main points that we're going to have, but the very first one is mastering, and there's going to be a training from the Pataja staff to how you can download data sets. The next 3 trainings that are listed under there are opportunities to take down those data sets from Pataja and use some initial tools to help you process that information. Under honing the skills using PIT Cleaner, there's also the Pithy tool, which was also previously presented at the PNAMP fish monitoring work group. So there will be a process that once you download a data set, we're going to try to do some trainings and hands-on of how do you clean your data using either PIT Cleaner or the Pithy tool. But I think that's really it. Thank you, Meg.
Yeah, thanks, Russ, for giving more details. Too, with the GitHub thing, Ben Staten of CritVic presented at the ETIS webinar last week. It was a bit of a flyover, I would call it, of a GitHub. And for us, he's going to do a deep dive. So that'll be a lot of more how-tos of GitHub. So we look forward to that. That'll be super helpful, I think, for folks out there. And I will swing back. Is there any questions? Jen and Sam, I can't see, so let me know.
Nope.
All right, cool. All right, next up, Mari Williams of PSMFC and StreamNet will now talk about the most recent task added to the fish monitoring work group lineup, update of terms and definitions used in CAP data standards. Take it away, Mari.
Hey, folks. So we started this project, task group, at the end of last year, and we spent the last couple of months having meetings in a small group. Do you want to go ahead, Meg, with the slide deck? So the purpose, as stated at the last fish monitoring work group, this was identified out of the CAP workshop where we had a whole bunch of folks come and say, let's have some discussion on what these words that we're all using to describe our data actually mean. And so We consolidated, or we pulled all the terms and definitions out of the DESs. You want to go next? Out of the DES, yes, go ahead. Next. Meg.
Yeah. Are you not seeing my screen?
Oh, okay. Now I moved. Thanks. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So we extracted the terms and definitions. I went through, and then Jen went through with me the full scope of the coordinated assessments DESs. We decided at this point to not look at StreamNet DES terms and definitions, to just do the pilot with all the coordinated assessments, both natural origin and hatchery origin terms and definitions. So out of 765 items, we flagged 197 of them. And the group with Casey, Becky, Elizabeth, Evan, Phil, and Jen, Mike, and myself went through 4, maybe 5 meetings in the last couple months and talked through all 197 of them. Some were really short. Some of them Mike saw in advance of us meeting and corrected grammar or misspellings. And so what we're left with now that we have gone through all the ones that were flagged, we have 12 that are already resolved because Mike is amazing. We have 19 reviewed and unchanged. And some of those were, this is a term that's used elsewhere too. Do we modify the definition or the term? And either the term was modified elsewhere to be divergent, or my flagging was not necessary. So we have 7 that we're going to crosswalk with other programs to ensure consistency with PAGIS and ARMAS. We have 134 recommended for adoption with the recommended changes that the small group found consensus on. And there are 25 recommended for further review by subject matter experts and the DES teams. Go ahead. So our next steps are going to be to format the items for further review in Microsoft Forms, similar to how we dealt with the development of HCAX DESs, and disperse those forms to the fish monitoring work group and folks associated with coordinated assessments. And y'all will have the opportunity to review, agree, object, make suggestions on all of those. We will be discussing these at the both the ones to adopt and items for further review at the StreamNet tech team and DES development team and coordinated assessments development teams, DES development teams at the end of the month. So if anyone is interested in, so that's going to be a conversation about how do we apply these and much more of the programmatic side of things. And we do have some really great folks from entities engaged in those groups to make sure that we are not breaking systems. This is intended to be adaptive management for better functioning, better communication, and better data. Or as Evan would say, better data faster. So we will update information provided through StreamNet. So when you download coordinated assessments documents out of the StreamNet front end, they will come with the updated terms and definitions to hopefully communicate our intent behind the data description, terms and definitions better to the user end of things. And a shameless plug for the March Washington, British Columbia workshops that are going to be happening. We have one specifically talking about data access and the process of developing the data exchange standards and using data from coordinated assessments, whether it's natural origin or hatchery, but with a focus on hatchery origin data. And we also have a workshop that will actually be the full day about the salmon ontology and control the vocabulary. And my voice is apparently about to go. Jen, do you have anything to add? Thank you, everybody that engaged on this.
Yeah, I would say thanks to everybody who jumped in. And I think if you're following closely, we talked about this at the last Fish Work Group meeting and said, come on and help. We had a few more people come and help in addition to our stalwart steering committee StreamNet folks. So it's been great. We're looking forward to being able to apply it, as Mari said, and that requires, more discussion. And Mari, in addition to your throat being whatever, if you got a cold or something, but your audio was a little broken up. So if people have questions, it's all right. I'm just saying that so you know. So if people have questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'm going to drop the link to the PNAMP project page again here, where anybody can find a little bit more about any of the tasks. And yes, the Washington, British Columbia American Fisheries Society chapter meeting coming up in March. Shameless plugs. We all should go. There's a lot of good stuff happening there, and the other chapter meetings too. But we're at this WABC this year. We're hosting 2 workshops, and we hope that you all consider participating in that.
All right. Any questions? And anything in chat?
Nothing in chat.
All right. Give it 10 seconds. I'll have a drink of water. You guys contemplate. All right. This update will be brief. We're waiting on additional staff resources from StreamNet. StreamNet has a dashboard in development that will contain specific information from multiple regional systems and sources for rotary screw traps in the basin. The next step will be active development of the dashboard with a goal of presenting it to the Fish Farming Work Group for QA/QC of the data at some point in 2025. It is estimated to be fully functional by fall. Side note, other items that are under discussion. Let me see if I have another slide. I don't. So other items of discussion are non-Columbia River Basin data and whether or not it can be integrated into the dashboard. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Megan Griffiths. She's kind of leading the charge on this part. She's with PSMFC, and her email is on the bottom of this slide. And she can kind of help.
I'm going to go ahead and we'll update that to, if you have any questions about the rotary screw trap right now, send an email to me or to project@StreamNet.
Okay.
Megan is fantastic and amazing, and we're trying to narrow the asks on her right now while she focuses on other things.
Okay, yeah, totally. So send your emails to Mari. Leave Megan alone. All right. Any questions on this? Because Mari's here, so she can fill them and give it a pause. And if not, feel free to ask. This is the last task we're covering, so if you guys do have questions on previous tasks, go ahead and type those in the chat or raise your hand right now. All right. I'm not hearing anything, so. All right, I have the honor of introducing Russell Perry, who works out of the Columbia River Research Laboratory in Cook, Washington. He is a research fish biologist in the quantitative ecology section at the USGS Western Fisheries Research Center. And I will have Russ take control of the screen.
All right, thanks. Everyone seeing my screen?
Yeah, it's just not in presenter mode yet. Perfect.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here and having the invite. I'm really excited to talk to such a large group of folks working in the Columbia Basin. So what I'm going to talk about today is putting time back into space for time Mark-Recapture models. I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Dalton, Hance, and Adam Pope. They're statisticians on our quantitative ecology team, and I can definitely say I wouldn't be here talking to you about this today if it weren't for those two. So let's see. I think I'll save questions to the end. I can't see hands go up or any chats, but if you want to put questions in the chat, Adam and Dalton are here, and maybe they can monitor the chat while I'm giving the presentation, and we'll save discussion for the end. Okay, with that. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to spend quite a bit of time defining the problem here. What we're going to be talking about are mostly spatial Cormack-Jolly-Sieber Mark-Recapture models that are implemented for migrating fish through rivers or migrating animals in general. And the problem is that these models aren't really designed to handle time-varying covariates. So they basically ignore time. So I'm going to spend a bunch of time setting up the problem. Then I'm going to talk about how we currently use these. When I say we, I mean the biologists using these models for migrating fish. How we're going to talk about workarounds for how they look at how survival varies over time. So we're going to use this virtual release example. Then I'm going to talk about these models that my team and I have developed over the past 5 or so years that we are calling time integrated migration and survival models that bring together both the migration aspect of tagging data into our Mark-Recapture models. And then I'll provide a couple of example applications, one from the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta and another close to home here in the Snake River. So in the Columbia Basin, there's no shortage of different tagging technologies that we use for migrating fish. And so the models I'm going to talk about today can be applied to pit tags, which you see some pit tag antenna arrays here. They can be applied to small streams. They can be applied to large rivers. They can be applied to acoustic tag data or radio telemetry data. The main keys about these models is that you're tracking individual fish across space. And why do we do this? We already kicked off this meeting talking a lot about pit tags and training. So why are we tagging these fish, and what are we trying to do here? And mostly we're trying to understand what factors affect fish mortality. So we might be interested in how river flow or some other aspect of water affects fish survival. With climate change, we're always have to keep an eye on how temperature is influencing mortality. And then, we live in a regulated river environment here, and so we're oftentimes interested in how hydroelectricity and dam operations influence survival. And so while we are monitoring fish moving through space, we also have to recognize that the environment changes over time and space. So with these tagged fish, we have to understand, where the tagged fish is. Not only that, but when is it there? And so I'm showing a figure here from Hasrick et al. 2022, which is acoustic tags for Chinook salmon in the Sacramento River. And I think this plot illustrates this idea nicely, because what we have time on the x-axis, we have river location on the y-axis, and then the flood plot here in the background is water temperature. And you can see that water temperature varies over space and time. We can see that it tends to be cooler higher up in the Sacramento River and warmer further down, and also cooler earlier in the season as opposed to late. And then laid over the top of this is what's called a waterfall plot that shows the individual histories of individual fish. So what we can see here is each line represents one fish. We can see that at a given point in time, fish are in different locations along the river. They're spread throughout the river. And if we look at a particular location, we can see that they're kind of moving through these areas at different times. And that's essentially what we're trying to handle with the models I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so let's take a step back then and what do I mean when I say space for time marker capture models? Well, these Cormack-Jolly-Sieber models were developed to estimate survival of populations over time. So the standard approach is to go out, mark a bunch of animals, and then come back at some time later, let's say it's a month later, do a survey where we recapture those individuals, tag some new ones, and then re-release them, and then continue this process over time. So survival here then represents the probability of surviving from between our temporal sampling occasions, with the P's here representing capture probabilities. So when we sample over time, the entire population, we know exactly the environmental conditions that the entire population is exposed to, whether we recapture them or not. We know between our sampling occasions, we would know the temperature or some other environmental conditions. Why we call these space for time marker capture models is because we swap the temporal dimension for the spatial dimension. So now we capture and mark and release some fish at some upstream site, and then they migrate down the river or up the river, and we detect them. We have monitoring locations, be that a pit tag array in a small stream, or acoustic tag array that's monitoring a dam. We monitor those fish at a particular location, and then what survival represents here is the proportion of fish that survive between our spatial sampling locations. Okay. Okay, so it's important to recognize here that these models, when we swap this spatial dimension for the temporal dimension, that the model no longer explicitly includes any temporal dimension. So here what I'm showing, for example, is let's just take fish that are detected at this site 2. They would, as I showed in that plot from Hance et al., they're entering this next downstream reach over a period of time. So there might be some passage timing distribution that looks like this. And then let's just say, for example, that we have a time series of flow over that time, river flow, that looks something like this. There's low flow, then there was some event that happened, there was a peak in flow, and then it went down. Well, when we use these models to estimate this survival through that river reach, that survival probability represents the average survival probability over all of these conditions that group of fish experienced. Okay, but we know that individuals are going to experience different conditions. So what we really might want to know is when fish pass at different points in time, we might want to know how those river conditions affect those individual fish. Is there a different detection or survival probability for individuals that pass, say, during this low flow or high flow period? Okay, and then what if we detected every single fish? Then this would not be a problem at all. We would know exactly when each individual was in a particular location at a particular time. But let's just take an example capture history. We don't detect all fish. Even acoustic tags have high detection probability, but we still do not detect every fish. And so let's just take an example capture history here, 101, which means an individual was detected at site 1. We did not detect it at site 2, but we know that it survived because we detected it at site 3. So let's just say the times when we detected that those 2 detections occurred at these different points in time at these different river flows. Well, what we don't know is when this fish past site 2. So when we're looking at, if we're interested in understanding what the river conditions were in that between site 2 and 3, we don't know whether that fish passed. We know it passed sometime between these two times, but we don't know what conditions it experienced in that reach where we're estimating S3. Okay. So our models are essentially designed to handle these missing covariate values and properly account for when you don't, the covariate values that fish experience when you do not detect them. And analysis tools abound. I spent like about 10 minutes just scanning for different software packages that are available for Mark-Recapture data, and I came up with 30 of them. And so this is a little word cloud of those 30 software programs, but none of them allow for missing individual covariates. And that's partly because the majority of these tools here were developed for, were not developed for space for time Mark-Recapture models. They were developed for temporal capture models where we don't have any missing temporal covariates, because the entire population, we know when we survey each of them, so we know the environmental conditions. Some of these tools in here are developed right here in the Columbia Basin by Columbia Basin Research for rivers like Basin Trib Pit and Atlas, but they are developed for different purposes and still don't allow for missing covariates. So we have spatial models, but they don't allow for missing covariates. So then how, for all these years, I mean, we've certainly been using Mark-Recapture models for, 30 plus years in the Columbia Basin. And so how do we, and certainly we've related survival to things like, river flow and dam operations and water temperature. So how do we deal with this problem with our currently available models? Well, there's several ad hoc approaches. And so there's some things we can do. We can take, a group of fish, and if we know their passage time distribution at a given, past a given monitoring station, then we can say, well, let's take the mean value of the covariates like over the period during which those fish were passing. And then we can assign those to a group of fish, whether they were detected or not. But we might really be, if we do this, we might really be masking some true underlying relation. Let's say we have, daily variation in river flow, but we're averaging that over a week or 2 weeks. We could have fish that are experiencing different conditions. And so there could be some loss of information here by aggregating over time. We could also use a virtual release where, and I'm going to talk more about this, I'm going to spend some more time on this, which is a pretty popular, I would say popular approach, common approach for analyzing Mark-Recapture data when you're interested in assigning temporal covariates to individuals. And the way this works is that you analyze just the individuals you detect, and you leave out the fish that you don't detect. And so then in this case, you don't have any missing covariate values. But this can only really be done one reach at a time. And you can, depending on what your detection probabilities are, really lose a lot of information because you're not using all the available data. Okay, so let's talk a little more about how this virtual release works. Okay, so let's say we release individuals upstream, and then we detect them at some our first monitoring station downstream. We can create this V here represents a virtual release of all the individuals we detected at our first site, and we can. And so the way this works is we include all the detected individuals in the model, and we leave out the undetected individuals. And so now we can assign those fish to particular time periods when they were detected and the environmental conditions that they experienced. But importantly, the undetected fish are excluded from the model because why? We don't know when they passed the location, so we don't know, we can't assign them to particular environmental conditions. But this can really result in a lot of loss of information because we may subsequently detect those fish downstream, but they are not included in the model. Okay, and so the way this works is that we would create a separate, say, Mark-Recapture model for each time period using these virtual releases. We can then estimate survival for each of these time periods and then associate that survival with the environmental conditions that they experienced. Expanding this a little further, here's some fictitious example detection data with numbers of fish released upstream. So we have different release groups color-coded here by blue, pink, and yellow. And then what happens is those fish are detected downstream, but they start spreading out over time and they start mixing together. So these bars represent the numbers of fish detected downstream from these different release groups. Okay, so what we can do though is we can take those detections at a downstream site, and for each of these time periods, we can create these virtual release models. And then Bob's our uncle. We can use these survival probabilities and the conditions during these times to relate to environmental covariates. But what happens is as soon as we go down from that reach, now all of a sudden, our fish, say in this time period 5, they're still spreading out as they move downstream. So they're entering different time periods at downstream detection sites. And this virtual release model is not incorporating that kind of transitions among these time periods in any way. So it can be pretty inefficient. And essentially going back to our kind of plot here, what we're not tracking is the fact that, say, virtual fish from our virtual release 1 here are kind of arriving at the next downstream locations during these other time periods, and these transitions are not included in these models when you use this approach. Okay, so what we really like to do is to relate, say, survival to time varying covariates, but these covariates aren't defined for undetected fish. This means that the likelihood is what we use to estimate the model parameters. It's analytically intractable. So that means the models don't allow for these missing covariate values. And one solution to do that is to integrate over the missing data. If we have not detected a fish, then what we need to do is to say, well, what were all the possible times that that fish could have passed, and account for that in our models. And the way we do that is with what we're calling the class. We've developed several different models, but they're all in the same class that we call time integrated migration and survival models. Okay, and the key link here is that we add to the model a model for travel time between detection sites. And this is something when we're analyzing tagging data, and I know a lot of folks in here probably work with tagging data, this is something we do anyway. We are often interested in what are the migration rates of fish, how fast are they moving downstream, but we kind of do these analyses separately. We do our Mark-Recapture model separately from kind of understanding migration. What we're doing here is putting them together. And then so if we can model travel times, then what we have is a travel time distribution that informs the probable passage times of non-detected fish. And then that helps us account for unknown passage times and covariate values, okay? So the way to think about it is that if we don't know when a fish was detected, but we have, we know the likely amount of time that they could have passed, then we can probability weight the covariates in the Mark-Recapture models and have a pretty good idea of when fish pass, but also account for the uncertainty of when of the distribution of times when fish may have passed. And then we throw this, I'm not getting much into the model details today, but we basically put all this stuff in one model and we estimate the parameters simultaneously. Okay, so let's talk about this some more. Travel time distributions of migrating fish often are right skewed, so they might look something like this. We might have a travel time distribution between two detection sites that looks something like this. We can fit a model to that. There's been a lot of great work done in the Columbia Basin for modeling migration rates of juvenile salmon. So in this case, we can fit a log normal distribution to our travel time data that is represented by a mean travel time and a standard deviation of travel time. And we can also model travel time itself as a function of the covariates we're interested in. Okay, so then I'm going to try and walk you through conceptually how these models work. We have two model fitting approaches. They're both Bayesian frameworks. And the first one is what we call this, it's integrating over the unobserved travel times by simulation. And this, we're going to talk a little bit more about this Perry et al. Paper later. But the way this works is that if we fit a travel time distribution to the data, then we can randomly draw a travel time from this distribution. Okay, and then that tells us when, for that draw, that tells us when an undetected fish potentially passed that site between detection site 1 and 3 here. So then we can assign a covariate value to it. We can then use that covariate value in our Mark-Recapture model to say that survival through reach 3 was a function of river flow at that particular time. We then draw a new set of parameters and we repeat this many times through a model fitting procedure called Monte Carlo Markov chain Monte Carlo. And then we draw a new travel time and we repeat this process many times. And eventually we would have the travel times that are drawn would be proportional to this travel time distribution. And that's how we integrate over the unobserved travel times, okay? The second approach is integration by summation, and this is, and so what we can do here is the histogram here represents the proportion of fish that say had a 3-day travel time, right? So that's a probability. We can, and the way to think about this is that we can weight our survivals by the probability that fish arrived at a given point in time. So we can take these probabilities, and the way to think about it is that the most likely time of arrival, 23% probability, would be during this 3-day time, but fish also could have arrived, say, in 5 days with like a 12% probability. And that format, we integrate by summation over by discretizing our travel time distribution or stratifying it. And then we draw new parameters and we repeat this many times via Hamiltonian Markov chain, which is a technique that's implemented in the STAN software, Bayesian software programming language, okay? So let's talk a little bit about, let's put this to work. I'm gonna show you some examples of papers that we have publishing this method. The first one I'm going to talk about is flow-mediated effects on travel time, routing, and survival of juvenile Chinook salmon in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. So a little bit about study details. This is a map of the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta with the Sacramento River coming in from the top here and San Francisco Bay being over on the left. This is a really very complex, tidally forced river delta with different migration routes that fish can go through. Some of them have higher survival and lower survival. And so this was a 5-year study of juvenile Chinook salmon with about 2,100 acoustic tags. There's 8 different reaches that were modeled, with these dots representing acoustic telemetry monitoring sites. And there's actually 4 different migration routes that were tracked that were for how fish can migrate through this delta. The model components, it uses this TIMS framework, this time integrated migration and survival approach. So the model tracks travel time, survival, detection probability, but also migration routing, which is an additional element that can be incorporated into these models. And then we incorporated daily individual covariates of river flow that was flowing into the delta and some operation of a diversion canal gate. Okay, so this is just an overview of the effects of flow on reach-specific survival through those 8 reaches. In our upper reaches, we just saw very high survival with not much of a relationship with flow. In the middle reaches 3, 4, 5, and 6, we saw strong relationships between river discharge and survival. And in the lower reaches, which 7 and 8, which were mostly tidal, we saw lower survival, but not much of a relationship with flow. So then what we could do with this information, combine it with the routing data, and then we could take this reach survival. We could take a very complex delta like that. We could take the components of the system-wide survival, combine them together to generate the overall relationships between river discharge and survival probability through that entire river delta. So this shows the relationship between discharge for 3 of the migration routes. So they're all related to flow. And what you can see here is this Georgiana Slough route, which brought fish to that southern part of the delta, had much lower survival than fish that stayed in the Sacramento River. And then this pink line here is the relationship through all routes by combining the routes and the reaches together. Okay, so that's what I'm going to show for this, but I encourage you to go check out that paper, because in this one modeling framework, we could also model travel time, migration routing, and detection probability as a function of river flow. Okay, the second example I'm going to talk about is closer to home here, right here in the lower Snake River. And this is Dalton's paper that uses this integration by summation technique. And it's gonna, model, we call this the temporally stratified Cormack-Jolly-Sieber model. Okay, so just some brief details on this study. This was conducted with sub-yearling Chinook salmon. What I'm going to show you here for the year it was applied to, the model was applied to over 200,000 hit-tagged fish and looked at their survival through the 4 lower snake dams. In this one, the model components are just travel time, survival, and detection probability. The daily covariates are river flow and spill through the dams. And I'm just showing you here the relationships that are generated from this model for fish passing Lower Granite Dam to Little Goose Dam. So let's just start at the bottom here. This shows the covariate for this particular year that we modeled. This shows the covariates of total river flow in the line here, and then spill in the shaded area. These are daily parameter estimates here for the log of the mean travel time from Lower Granite to Little Goose. So this shows how it's related to those conditions. Then up here we have survival to Little Goose, from Lower Granite to Little Goose. daily survival probabilities. Moving up the graph here, we have daily capture probabilities. We're also a function of flow and spill. And then last but not least is the sample sizes of detected fish at Lower Granite Dam that were used in this model. Okay. All right, so let's just summarize things here. So summary of the time integrated migration and survival framework, where you can, this modeling framework allows for time varying individual covariates. It utilizes a single integrated model for both survival and travel time. So I think one of the big advances of this is that in a single model, we are emulating both the spatiotemporal migration process. So the model is really tracking when, not only where, but when we're detecting fish during the migration, so that we can relate their demographics to environmental conditions. And I think importantly, this because we're analyzing the entire data set, we don't have to exclude any information. This modeling approach extracts the maximum information from the Mark-Recapture data. So where are we at? Currently, for our current and future work, we have ongoing studies in the Klamath and Yakima rivers where we're applying these models. Those are acoustic telemetry studies. And upcoming in 2026, we're excited to work with the Corps of Engineers and Pacific Northwest National Laboratories to conduct this large scale. Oh, I'm sorry, that should be actually 2025. That's this year we'll be doing this study, this system-wide survival study in the Snake and Columbia rivers, where we will be applying the TIMS modeling framework. Okay, so you're probably all going to ask me where you can get this model. And currently, what we are working on, actually our package to be able to implement these models. Like, we'd love to be able to put this model in the hands of others, so that we're not the only, so that only the handful of statisticians can run this model. So we're not there yet, but we are definitely working on tools that so that other people can use these models. And with that, I'll take some questions. I put this one in here just for Dalton. I didn't talk a lot about equations today, but there is a lot of math going on under the hood. And so these are the model equations for our multi-state temporally stratified CJS model. So with that, I will take any questions that folks have.
Hey, Russ, it's Adam. Denise Kelsey has typed a question in the chat, and Dalton has answered it in the chat as well. But she asks, how does your model handle fish that turn around and are detected heading in the opposite direction and may or may not be detected headed downstream again? And Dalton answered it to some extent, and I'll just elaborate a little further and sort of reiterate that any space for time Mark-Recapture model does not handle that situation. They all assume unidirectional movement, and that's because these CJS and multi-state models were developed. These Mark-Recapture models were developed for sampling at fixed points in time, and time obviously moves in one direction. And so that is a limitation of all space for time models. The way that we handle it specifically in our group is it'll get handled through the capture history generation process, right? So at each fixed location, you're either detected or you're not detected. And then there's a time associated with that, right? Or not. And so if a fish is detected downstream, then it gets a 1 at that location for being detected there. If it's redetected again upstream, that does not go into the capture history. So we know that it has survived as far downstream as that downstream most detection. If it goes back upstream and then dies, then the model would assume incorrectly that the mortality is ascribed to that
the reach downstream of its last detection. So that is a potential pitfall of any of these space for time models. Having said that, to introduce a further wrinkle, juvenile salmon typically will be migrating downstream only. If you see an upstream detection in most riverine systems of a tagged juvenile salmonid, it may represent a predated tagged fish. And so that fish may have actually died or been predated downstream of its downstream-most detection, and then the predator may have migrated upstream. So there are multiple sort of nuances associated with these kinds of things. All that having been said, Dalton does mention that we are exploring ways to incorporate those upstream detections in different model frameworks as well.
Great, awesome.
Right.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Adam. Glad for you to join the conversation for sure. I see Brian has his hand up.
Hi, Russell. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yep.
So early on, you made the assumption that the travel time distribution of the detected fish is the same as the undetected fish, because as you're drawing from the distribution that you empirically observe, and basically then using that to kind of assign whatever covariates are occurring at that particular time for that fish. But if you think about it, that's not really, you don't really know that information. You can't make that equality, the assumption that the distributions are equal. And so one way to think about it is think about your distribution where you have day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, and then you compute this curve from it using your log normal distribution or whatever. But let's say that for argument that represents the true distribution for all fish to detected or not going downstream. Now, if, for example, what actually happened is on, let's say, day 3 downstream from whatever your virtual release happened, the detection probability at that dam went much lower. No fish were detected or something like that. What that would do is distort the distribution of that you would calculate. So that would end up being your empirical distribution that you would assume is happening, where it's really not the case. What you're doing is you're omitting all the fish that were detected on day 3 but weren't. And so you tend to distort the distribution. It could be one way or the other, depending on what days subsequent to your virtual release, how that detection probability downstream changed as time proceeded. And so, in some extreme cases, you'll get very different distributions for those that weren't there. It might be that all the fish that were not detected happened to show up at the downstream dam when some observe, something was happening, in that reach. So I'm not sure how, I don't think you can account for that with only looking at for the upstream to the downstream. You have to go further down and work with that. So
I think you have I think it's a really good point, and you're actually getting at a kind of a fundamental, it's one of the fundamental assumptions of all Mark-Recapture models, is that the parameters are the same for detected and undetected fish. I will say there's more information that is used in the model. This is the other advantage of it, is that when you don't detect a fish, in the example I use where you just missed it at one location, there is information about that fish's travel time because it's in each reach, because it's constrained to add up to the total time between the detection, say at that first detection site and the third detection site. So that actually constrains the possible travel times, and that's accounted for or included, more information that's actually included in the model to help inform the parameters.
There's more than just that, Russ. There's more than just that, Russ. Actually, in Brian's specific example, this is Adam again. In Brian's specific example, we actually, so what and this is it's a really good point, because often we treat detection probability as a nuisance parameter, and we sort of either don't report it or report it in an appendix or a supplement, but it's absolutely fundamental to arriving at any of these other parameters. In the case you mentioned, Brian, where you're talking about variable detection probabilities, we actually are not using simply the empirical distribution of detections to estimate travel times. We are actually using the what we would call the true arrival distribution weighted by detection probability. So because we are also estimating detection probability in that same model, we can put a functional form on that detection probability and estimate detection probability as a function of time varying covariates as well. Or we can estimate simply stratified detection probability, right? What's your detection probability on day 1, day 2, day 3 in your particular example? And if we estimate that detection probability as being lower on a particular day, then the model accounts for that and assumes that more fish actually arrived on that day in modeling that travel time distribution, right? So it actually does get accounted for in that particular way in your example. Now, a slightly different example would be if fish somehow aren't identically distributed, like if individuals aren't identically distributed. If there's schooling, perhaps, if there's sort of a fitness component where mortality, occurs among fish that are likely to migrate slower or faster. In that particular case, yeah, we would have to actually make some modeling decisions in order to sort of relax that assumption. And our current models don't do that. They do actually assume identically distributed individuals. So I hope that kind of gets at answering the two different scenarios that you're kind of pointing out here.
And I'll just add a third point, because you can't stop talking, which is we also, as part of our workflow, do extensive model checks. So we will check to see if the model is compatible with the data at the level that we've temporally stratified. And so if you go read any of our papers, we just had one published last year. In the supplementary materials, we put, look, here's how the model performs. If we simulate data under the model and compare it to the data we actually have, we try to make sure that they look very similar. And so a scenario like you're talking about would tend to show up in those posterior predictive checks where something would be off.
Okay,
All right.
so I'm going to try and handle a few of the chat questions, and then I saw Phil out on Sandstrom. I don't know if you still got your hand up, but then I'll get to you. Kyle, hi, how's it going? It's good to see you on here. Ask what type of sample sizes are needed to run these models, and I would say it's not a lot different than standard Mark-Recapture models. So, and it's proportional to detection probability. So with acoustic tags, you could fit this to 100 fish. What I would say, and this is true of any model, is that when you're looking at especially environmental covariates, you have to think about what the range of the covariates are that your fish have experienced. If you have a narrow range of conditions, then you may get a different result as if you say that sample sizes are proportional to capture probability. Adam, Dalton, you wanna add to that?
Yeah, we can give examples, right? Like in the papers, in our 2018 paper, there were, what was it, something like 2,100 fish over 5 years. Mm-hmm. And we were able to estimate those relationships that you showed in the plots from that sample size. And then, of course, Dalton's papers as well had slightly larger sample sizes on the order of thousands, I think. But I'll let him speak to that. But I would just say, yeah, we can. I would encourage folks to again, kind of look at those papers and see, that the results are based on those, 2,000 fish in that one particular case.
And I'll kind of also add to I think this is supposed to speak to Derek's question and to Kyle's question. and specifically with pit tags, and I'm gonna drop a link to a presentation we gave, but these models actually make more use of the sample size that we do have. So because we're not having to condition on detection at lower granite to assign a covariate, we can start with release. And we wind up massively boosting the sample size. And so having higher precision just by changing the model, instead of requiring more fish, we can make more use of the existing data. And then, if there's questions about whether certain groups can be combined or not, maybe they have different release dates. Those are all things you can put a term in the model for. So it's a very cohesive framework for answering multiple kinds of questions. It needs less of a sample size of released fish than virtual release models because it conditions on release, not on detection. And I'll drop here's the presentation we gave at the Pythagoras workshop.
And then, so Simone asked here if it can include individual traits. Yep. So our Sacramento model that I showed you there, Sacramento San Joaquin Delta, that had fish size. That's specifically an individual based model. So survival was positively related to fish size. So yep, it's totally possible to incorporate individual covariates into those models. And then let's see, Phil, did you still have a question?
I think you guys covered a lot of it. I mean, honestly, one of the things I was interested in, and Dalton touched on it a lot there, was kind of going, what happens when you compare this new approach to some of the more traditional results, and what are the major takeaways for those benefits coming out of it? And then just the other thing that was sitting in the back of my head on some of the conversations was Adam's response to that sort of unidirectional piece, and like interesting in the Sacramento San Joaquin, right? And a lot of it, of course, is depending on the spacing of the receivers, what you see with those tidal influences, and like how you might go about building a covariate like that into it if you haven't already. I mean, you're super familiar with it. And great presentation, and definitely we'll be checking those out.
Cool. And I would say, we're really interested in, I think we believe that if you're tagging migrating fish, moving down rivers, you should be using our models. So, but we don't yet have the tools. We don't yet have the tools that's what we're trying to work on, is getting the tools together to just pass off in our package to folks to be able to use. We're not there yet, but I will just put it out there if folks are interested. I think we're getting close enough where we have some what I would call templates that folks could use if they wanted to apply, particularly CJS models of this nature to their system. So feel free to reach out to us if you really want to kind of get down and dirty and start using these models. Any other questions?
Derek Faber had one in the chat. Russ, do you want me to read it?
Yeah, no, I see it. I think, so yeah, we can talk about that more. So this is, I think Dalton covered it a little bit. And with respect to sample size and low detection probabilities for pit tagged fish. Yeah, Dalton, you could speak, I think, the best to this question. I do think it's the high sample sizes. I mean, there's a lot of pit tagged fish in the Columbia Basin. Low detection probabilities means that you do need more fish, and then it's kind of proportional to the scale, your kind of temporal scale at which you define your covariates. So we often think of daily covariates in terms of river flows. So it's going to be kind of proportional to how you have fish exposed to those conditions over time. And Dalton, I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more of a modeling strategy or question, and how do you actually approach these? You absolutely want to use as many fish as possible. So, and this is the nice thing about having Pythagoras and having people that collaborate in the basin and having all the data available. So say you are interested in your particular release of fish released in some tributary, and they're going to go through the Columbia River dams. Detection probability is a nuisance. We're constantly wasting sample size, or we're having to estimate it though, right? And so that winds up reducing our precision. If you can throw in a bunch of other fish in the model that you actually don't really care about, but they're there because you think that they are representative of the same detection process that is going to affect your fish, then that's how you can really leverage all the available data, put terms in the model to say that sample size is either exactly the same or similar in some way, because you're conditioning on time of arrival and maybe individual covariates like a size bin. That helps you get a much more precise estimate of detection probability for the group you're really interested in. And once you have that precision nailed down, everything else becomes a lot easier to estimate. And so it's a modeling strategy where we think that you want to leverage as much of the existing data as possible, but obviously you have to account for the things that fish are released at different locations, different times, and that's why it's a comprehensive framework that can answer all those questions and allow that leveraging.
Excellent. Those are great questions and great answers, guys. I appreciate all three of you guys being here to kind of field this stuff. All right, we have until 11:30, but if you guys don't have any more questions, we can always wrap it up. And Russ let me know that it's fine to send out his email. So if you guys want to chat more with him about this or follow up with something, he's available. And I'm sure probably Adam and Dalton are too. You guys have questions? You're on mute, Russ.
Yeah, so just going to second that. We did not have time to have the presentation reviewed for public posting, but if anyone is interested, reach out to Megan and she can send you the presentation. Feel free to reach out to myself or Adam and Dalton. And I appreciate the questions and the interest with everyone attending today.
Definitely. We'll second that. We had a lot of interest today.
Yeah, thank you, Russ, for presenting, and Dalton and Adam for joining us. It was awesome. I think I saw 97 people at the start. So very nice. We got a hot topic. Thanks to the three of you for being online and for Meg for making it happen. It's awesome.
All right. All right. Thanks, guys. I will take over the screen again and just do a few wrap ups. All right. Alrighty. Big thanks to Dalton, Russ, and Adam for that presentation. Like Jen said, I saw 99, so we did a pretty awesome job wrangling some folks in and getting you guys' information and awesome work out there. So appreciate you guys coming in today. I'll wrap up with some reminders after this meeting. Like Russ said, I'll send out a follow-up email with updates on the webinar series, as well as just a reminder that you guys need to contact me for the recording this week. We're not going to post it, but you can still have access to it, or if anybody in your agency or organization wants to watch it, that's fine too. If you'd like to be added to the distribution list, or you have some interesting work you'd like to present, or have a presentation recommendation, just shoot me an email. We are a resource for you guys, so let us know if you have suggestions. I am going to give a little shameless plug for the Emerging Technologies Information Sessions webinar series that PNAMP is co-hosting with StreamNet. Last week we had presentations on modeling and analysis. I'd mentioned earlier that Ben Staten had done a kind of overview of GitHub. There were 2 other presentations. This week was artificial intelligence and machine learning. Next week is QA/QC. Sam or Jen will drop a link to the webpage in the chat. That way you guys can see we have 3 more weeks. Yeah, a total of 5 weeks. So we have 3 more weeks of presentations every Wednesday from 9 to 11 Pacific time, in case you guys are out in a different time zone. Please note, this recording will not be publicly accessible. which is totally fine. There's just some loopholes sometimes with agencies where they don't want us doing that. We're going to reconvene on April 17th, same bat time, same bat channel. To close out for today, I would like to give a big thank you to Russ Perry, Adam Pope, and Dalton for presenting on their very cool model. And thank you to our core team, task leads, and you guys, our work group. Enjoy the rest of your week.